The summer sun blazed over Willow Springs, Texas, in 1878, casting long shadows through the church windows as Felicity James stood alone at the far edge of the social hall, her gloved fingers nervously smoothing the folds of her modest blue cotton dress. The monthly church gathering was in full swing, with nearly every resident of the small frontier town in attendance, yet she felt more isolated than she had in the vast emptiness of her family's ranch. Felicity had been back in Willow Springs for barely a week after 5 years away. At 23, she'd returned from Boston a different woman than the girl who'd left, educated, refined, and carrying a weight of sorrow few in town knew about. The awkward glances and whispered conversations that stopped when she approached made it clear that coming home hadn't been the comfort she'd hoped for. The small orchestra of local musicians struck up another lively tune, and couples whirled across the wooden floor. Felicity sipped her lemonade, trying not to appear as uncomfortable as she felt. Her aunt had insisted she attend, claiming it would help her reintegrate into society, but Felicity now regretted agreeing. From across the room, a tall figure caught her attention. He stood with a group of cowboys near the entrance, his broad shoulders and straight posture setting him apart. Unlike the others, whose attention was focused on the dancing or the refreshment table, his gaze seemed fixed on her. When their eyes met, Felicity quickly looked away, heart inexplicably racing. The music shifted to a slower waltz, and Felicity was considering making an early exit when movement in her peripheral vision made her look up. The cowboy was crossing the room with purposeful strides, weaving between dancers and conversation groups. As he approached, she noticed details she hadn't from afar: the clean, pressed quality of his simple clothing, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and most strikingly, the intensity of his blue eyes. He stopped before her, removed his hat, and offered a slight bow. "Pardon me, miss. I couldn't help noticing you haven't danced yet this evening. I'm Russell James. Would you do me the honor?" Felicity blinked in surprise, both at the request and the coincidence of his surname matching her own. "James? Are you related to the James family on the north side of the county?" A smile touched his lips. "No relation that I know of, though I've only been in these parts about 3 years." He extended his hand. "And you are?" "Felicity James," she replied, hesitantly placing her hand in his. "I've only recently returned to Willow Springs." "Then we're both outsiders of a sort," he said, leading her toward the dance floor. "Though I reckon you've got deeper roots here than I do." As Russell guided her into the waltz, Felicity was surprised by his graceful movements. His hand at her waist was respectful, and despite his obvious strength, his touch was light. Up close, she noticed the small scar that ran along his jawline and the sun-weathered quality of his skin that spoke of years working outdoors. "You dance very well for a cowboy," Felicity observed. Russell chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "My mother insisted all her sons learn proper dancing. Said no matter where life took us, knowing how to move without stepping on a lady's toes would serve us well. She sounds like a wise woman." "The wisest," he agreed, a flicker of sadness crossing his features. "She passed on 3 winters ago." "I'm sorry," Felicity said softly, recognizing the familiar shadow of grief. "I lost my father last year. It's what brought me home from Boston." They danced in silence for a moment, a new understanding passing between them. "Boston?" Russell finally asked. "That explains the accent I couldn't quite place." Felicity hadn't realized her speech had changed during her time away. "I was attending a women's college there. My father believed in education, even for daughters." "Another wise parent," Russell remarked with approval. "What did you study?" "Literature and mathematics, primarily. I was training to become a teacher before." She trailed off, unwilling to elaborate on the circumstances that had interrupted her plans. Russell didn't press. Instead, he skillfully guided her through a turn as the music swelled. "Well, Willow Springs could use a good teacher. The school's been making do with Reverend Miller's wife, who has more enthusiasm than training, from what I hear." As they continued to dance, Felicity found herself relaxing for the first time since she'd returned to town. There was something steady about Russell, a calm confidence that didn't demand or presume. "And what brought you to Willow Springs, Mr. James?" she asked. "Just Russell, please," he said. "I was working cattle drives up from San Antonio for years. Got tired of the constant moving. Wanted something more permanent." His expression became more guarded. Had some trouble up north that made starting fresh seem wise. Before Felicity could inquire further, the music ended. Russell stepped back and bowed again. Thank you for the dance, Miss James. Felicity, she corrected, surprised by her own forwardness. Felicity, he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. Would you care for some punch? She nodded, and he offered his arm to escort her to the refreshment table. As they walked, Felicity noticed several curious glances from the townspeople, including a particularly disapproving look from Mrs. Porter, the banker's wife and self-appointed guardian of town propriety. At the punch table, they were approached by Sheriff Thomas, a burly man with a handlebar mustache who'd been friends with Felicity's father. Evening, Felicity. The sheriff greeted her warmly before turning a more measuring gaze on Russell. James. Sheriff, Russell acknowledged with a nod. Felicity sensed an undercurrent between the men. You two know each other? The sheriff and I have had a few professional encounters, Russell said carefully. Just keeping an eye on newcomers, Sheriff Thomas added, his tone neutral but his eyes watchful. Your aunt was looking for you, Felicity. Said something about needing to leave soon. After the sheriff moved on, Felicity turned to Russell. Professional encounters? A wry smile crossed his face. Nothing too serious. When I first arrived, there were some questions about my background. The sheriff's cautious, as he should be. The explanation seemed incomplete, but Felicity didn't pursue it. She'd learned in Boston that everyone had parts of their past they preferred to keep private. I should find my aunt, she said reluctantly. Of course. Russell handed her a cup of punch. But before you go, I work at the Rockingham Ranch, just east of town. They're looking for someone to teach the foreman's children and some of the other ranch hands' kids. If you're interested in teaching again, I could put in a word. Felicity considered the offer. She'd been wondering how to occupy her days now that she was responsible for her family's small ranch. Teaching a few children would be a welcome diversion and provide much-needed income. That's very kind. I would appreciate the introduction. I'll speak to Mr. Morrison tomorrow, Russell promised. Would it be proper to call on you later this week to let you know what he says? Yes, that would be fine. We're at the old James place, about 3 miles southwest of town. Russell nodded. I know it. Thursday afternoon. Thursday, she agreed. As she turned to find her aunt, Russell gently caught her hand. Thank you for the dance, Felicity. It was the highlight of my evening. The simple sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, bringing warmth to her cheeks. Mine as well. Felicity found her aunt, Mrs. Eleanor Winters, engaged in conversation with the Reverend's wife. When she approached, both women gave her curious looks. I see you've met Russell James, Aunt Eleanor remarked as they gathered their belongings to leave. Yes, he was kind enough to ask me to dance. Her aunt exchanged a glance with Mrs. Miller. He seems to have taken a shine to you. He's never been one for socializing at these gatherings before. He's a hard worker, Mrs. Miller added. Keeps to himself mostly, but always the first to help when someone's in need. As they walked to the wagon, Aunt Eleanor linked her arm through Felicity's. Just be careful, dear. There are rumors about that young man's past. What kind of rumors? Felicity asked, trying to sound merely curious rather than defensive. Nothing specific, her aunt admitted. But he arrived rather suddenly 3 years ago, and some say he was running from something up north. The sheriff checked his references, of course, but still, one wonders. Felicity thought of Russell's guarded expression when he mentioned trouble up north. Perhaps he simply wanted a fresh start. Many come west for that reason. Perhaps, her aunt conceded, helping Felicity into the wagon. But a young woman in your position should be cautious about new acquaintances. My position? Felicity questioned, though she knew full well what her aunt meant. A young woman alone, managing a ranch, with a considerable inheritance, Aunt Eleanor clarified. You'll attract certain types of attention, not all of it honorable. The remainder of the ride home was quiet, with Felicity lost in thought. As they approached the modest 2-story house that had been her childhood home, she gazed out at the fields and small herd of cattle that were now her responsibility. The ranch was nothing compared to some of the vast operations in Texas, but it had been enough for her father to provide well and send her east for education. He's coming to call on Thursday, Felicity said as her aunt prepared to depart in her own buggy. Russell James. He knows of a teaching position at the Rockingham. Aunt Eleanor frowned. I'll come stay with you that day. That won't be necessary, Felicity replied firmly. I'm not a child, Aunt Eleanor, and we'll be meeting on the front porch in broad daylight. Her aunt sighed but didn't argue further. Your father would want me to look after you. I know, Felicity said more gently, but he also raised me to think for myself. After her aunt left, Felicity stood on the porch, looking out at the land as twilight settled over it. She'd felt so certain leaving for Boston 5 years ago, eager to expand her horizons beyond the confines of Willow Springs. Now she was back, with education but also with the weight of experiences she never could have anticipated. As she prepared for bed that night, Felicity found herself thinking of Russell James and the careful way he'd held her during their dance. There had been something in his eyes, a recognition, perhaps, of shared experience or understanding. Whatever his past might hold, she couldn't deny the connection she'd felt, brief though their encounter had been. Thursday couldn't come soon enough. The next few days passed slowly as Felicity settled back into ranch life. She reviewed the accounts her father's foreman had kept, made arrangements with the bank, and explored the house that felt both intimately familiar and strangely different after her years away. When Thursday arrived, she found herself checking the clock with embarrassing frequency. By early afternoon, she'd changed her dress twice, finally settling on a simple blue cotton that was practical but becoming. Shortly after 2 o'clock, she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. From the window, she watched Russell ride up on a handsome chestnut gelding. He was dressed much as he had been at the social, though his clothes showed the dust of a morning's work. After tethering his horse, he removed his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair before approaching the door. Felicity waited for his knock before opening the door, not wanting to appear too eager. Good afternoon, Mr. James, she greeted him formally, conscious of the open door and the possibility of passing neighbors. Miss James, he replied with a small smile that suggested he found their shared surname amusing. I hope I find you well today. Very well, thank you. Would you care to sit on the porch? I've prepared some lemonade. They settled into the wooden rocking chairs that had been fixtures on the James porch for as long as Felicity could remember. The day was warm but not unpleasant, with a gentle breeze stirring the leaves of the old oak tree in the front yard. I spoke with Mr. Morrison, Russell began after accepting a glass of lemonade. He's very interested in meeting you. The children at the ranch have had sporadic schooling at best, and he's concerned about their futures. How many children are there? 8 altogether, ranging from 6 to 14. The foreman has 3, and there are 5 others belonging to various hands. Morrison is willing to pay a fair wage and provide transportation if needed. Felicity nodded thoughtfully. It sounds promising. When would he like to meet? Monday morning, if that suits you. I'd be happy to escort you to the ranch. That would be fine, she agreed, then hesitated before adding, my aunt seems to think I should be cautious around you. Russell didn't appear surprised or offended. He set his glass down carefully. Your aunt is right to be protective. She doesn't know me, and neither do you, really. Is there something I should know? Felicity asked directly. Russell was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving to the distant hills. I wasn't entirely truthful about why I left the North, he finally said. There was trouble, but not of my making. He turned to face her fully. I was a deputy in a small town in Colorado. The local mining company had hired a new security chief who started pushing around the smaller claim holders, trying to force them out. When they resisted, things got violent. His expression darkened with the memory. I tried to uphold the law evenly, but the sheriff was in the mining company's pocket. When I arrested the security chief for beating an old prospector nearly to death, the sheriff released him and told me to look the other way from then on. What did you do? Felicity asked quietly. I refused. The next day, the security chief was found dead. The sheriff claimed to have evidence it was me, though I was nowhere near the place when it happened. I had a choice: stand trial before a judge who also had mining company interests, or leave. So you ran. Russell nodded slowly. Not my proudest moment, but I knew what would happen if I stayed. The real killer would never be found, and I'd hang for a murder I didn't commit. Did you tell Sheriff Thomas this when you arrived in Willow Springs? Eventually, he sent telegrams to verify parts of my story. Enough checked out that he decided to give me the benefit of the doubt. I've tried to live quietly and honestly since then. Felicity absorbed this information, studying Russell's face. His account explained his careful manner and the tension with the sheriff. It also aligned with what she'd observed of his character, the respect he showed others, his straightforward way of speaking. "Thank you for telling me the truth," she said finally. "I didn't want there to be secrets between us," Russell replied, then looked slightly embarrassed at the implication of his words. "That is, if we're to be friends." "Friends?" Felicity echoed, finding she hoped for more than that, despite having known him such a short time. Their conversation shifted to lighter topics: the ranch, the town, books they had both read. Russell proved to be well-read despite his lack of formal education, having made use of whatever reading material he could find during long nights on cattle drives. As the afternoon waned, Russell reluctantly rose to leave. "I should get back to the ranch before dark." "Of course," Felicity said, standing as well. "Thank you for arranging the meeting with Mr. Morrison." "It was my pleasure." Russell hesitated, then asked, "Would it be too forward to ask if I might call on you again, apart from our Monday appointment?" Felicity felt a flutter of anticipation. "Not too forward at all. I would welcome your company." His smile transformed his serious face, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Sunday after church, perhaps?" "That would be lovely." As Russell mounted his horse, he turned back to her. "I've enjoyed our conversation, Felicity, more than I can properly express." "As have I," she replied, standing on the porch steps. He tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Felicity watching his retreating figure until he disappeared around the bend in the road. The following Monday, Russell arrived promptly to escort Felicity to the Rocking M Ranch. The ride gave them the opportunity to converse more freely than they had on her porch, and Felicity found herself increasingly drawn to Russell's thoughtful nature and quiet humor. The Rocking M was impressive, a sprawling main house surrounded by bunkhouses, barns, and corrals spread across a valley ringed by gentle hills. Mr. Morrison, a robust man in his 50s with a booming voice and firm handshake, welcomed Felicity warmly. "James here speaks highly of your education, Miss James," Morrison said, leading them into his study. "Says you attended college back east." "Yes, sir. I studied at the Women's Educational Institute in Boston for 4 years. Morrison raised his eyebrows, clearly impressed. "And what brought you back to our humble corner of Texas?" "Family obligations, primarily," Felicity answered, not wanting to delve into the details of her father's death. "But I've always intended to teach, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to do so here." The interview proceeded smoothly, with Morrison outlining his expectations and Felicity discussing her approach to education. By the end, they had reached an agreement. Felicity would teach the children 4 days a week in a small building near the main house that had once been used for storage. "Russell can bring you in his wagon on teaching days," Morrison concluded. "No sense in you making the journey alone, and it's on his way." Outside, as Russell helped Felicity into his wagon for the return journey, she couldn't contain her excitement. "It's perfect. The salary is more than fair, and the children sound delightful." Russell smiled at her enthusiasm. "Morrison's a good man. Demanding but fair. The children are a lively bunch, but eager to learn." As they rode back toward the James Ranch, Felicity found herself studying Russell's profile. In the weeks since the church social, he had occupied her thoughts more than she cared to admit. There was a steadiness to him that she found deeply appealing after the tumult of her last year in Boston. "You're staring," Russell observed without looking at her, though a smile played at the corners of his mouth. Felicity felt her cheeks warm. "I was just thinking how fortunate our meeting was. If you hadn't asked me to dance that night." "I'd been watching you from the moment you arrived," Russell admitted. "You stood apart from everyone, but not like you thought yourself above them. More like you weren't sure where you fit anymore." His perception startled her. "That's exactly how I felt." "How did you know?" Russell was quiet for a moment. "Because I felt that way myself. Like you're among your own people, but still a stranger somehow." The understanding in his voice touched something deep in Felicity. Without thinking, she placed her hand on his arm. "Thank you for crossing that room." Russell placed his free hand over hers, his touch warm and gentle. "Best decision I ever made." The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Felicity taught at the Rocking M Monday through Thursday, with Russell transporting her in his wagon. On Sundays, after church, he would call on her at the ranch, sometimes bringing a book he thought she might enjoy, or simply sitting with her on the porch, talking until sunset. Gradually, she shared more about her time in Boston, including the painful end to her engagement to Professor William Blackstone, who had been exposed as already married with a family in New York. The scandal had coincided with news of her father's failing health, prompting her return to Texas. Russell listened without judgment, his steady presence a comfort as she spoke of her humiliation and heartbreak. In turn, he confided more about his life before Willow Springs, his childhood on a small farm in Tennessee, the loss of his parents, his years drifting westward in search of purpose. By late summer, their growing attachment was obvious to everyone in Willow Springs. Most viewed the courtship favorably, though there were still whispers about Russell's mysterious past and questions about Felicity's suitability for life as a rancher's wife after her years of education. One evening in early September, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the western sky in fiery hues, Russell turned to Felicity with unusual seriousness. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice tight with anxiety. Felicity's heart constricted with sudden fear. "What is it?" "I received a telegram yesterday from the new sheriff in Silverton, that's the town in Colorado where I was a deputy." She waited, holding her breath. "They've arrested the man who actually committed the murder I was accused of. He confessed everything, including how the mining company paid him to kill the security chief and frame me when they realized their chief had become a liability." Relief flooded through Felicity. "Russell, that's wonderful news. Your name is cleared." "Yes," he agreed, though his expression remained troubled. "But it means I need to return to Silverton, at least temporarily. The new sheriff needs my testimony to bring charges against the mining company officials who orchestrated the whole thing." "How long will you be gone?" Felicity asked, trying to mask her disappointment at the prospect of his absence. "A few weeks, perhaps a month." Russell took her hands in his. "Felicity, I don't want to leave you, even temporarily. These past months have been the happiest of my life." She squeezed his hands. "Mine too." Russell's blue eyes searched her face. "I had planned to wait until I could offer you more stability, a better future. But now, facing weeks away from you." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Felicity. I think I began falling in love with you the moment I saw you standing alone at that church social." Joy bloomed in Felicity's chest, but before she could respond, Russell continued. "I know this isn't the proper way to do things. I should speak to your family first, have a house ready, a more established position." Felicity pressed her fingers gently to his lips. "Russell, stop. Do you truly not know how I feel about you?" The vulnerability in his eyes nearly broke her heart. "I've hoped, but I love you," she said simply. "I don't need a grand house or promises of wealth. I just need you, your kindness, your honesty, your strength." Russell's face transformed with happiness. He cupped her cheek with a calloused hand. "When I return from Colorado, will you marry me, Felicity James? Will you make me the happiest man in Texas?" "Yes," she whispered, tears of joy blurring her vision. "Yes, I will marry you, Russell James." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, then kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart soar. When they finally parted, both were smiling through tears. "We'll have a proper engagement when I return," Russell promised, "with a ring and all the traditional formalities." "I don't need formalities," Felicity assured him. "But I would like Aunt Eleanor to hear the news from us directly, rather than through town gossip." Russell nodded, looking slightly daunted at the prospect of facing her formidable aunt. "I'll speak with her before I leave for Colorado." The meeting with Aunt Eleanor the following day went better than either of them had anticipated. Though initially skeptical, she was impressed by Russell's forthright account of his past and his plans for the future. The news of his exoneration seemed to ease her final reservations. "My sister would have wanted Felicity to marry for love," she conceded. "And it's clear you two have found that together." 2 days later, Felicity stood on the train platform, fighting back tears as Russell prepared to board the westbound train. He held her hands tightly, reluctant to let go. "I'll write every day," he promised, "and I'll be back as soon as possible." "Be careful," Felicity urged. Even with the confession, those mining officials might still be dangerous. Russell nodded grimly. "I'll be on my guard. The new sheriff is sending an escort to meet me at the station." The train whistle blew, signaling the final boarding call. "I love you, Felicity James," Russell said, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "And I love you, Russell James," she replied, forcing a smile. "Come back to me. Always," he vowed, finally releasing her hands and boarding the train. Felicity watched until the train disappeared from sight, then walked slowly back to where her aunt waited with the buggy. The weeks ahead stretched before her like an endless plain, but she took comfort in knowing that Russell would return not as a man running from his past, but as one who had faced it and been vindicated. The following weeks were difficult but manageable. Felicity threw herself into teaching, expanded the curriculum for her eager students, and began making improvements to her father's ranch with an eye toward its future as her home with Russell. Russell's letters arrived regularly, detailed accounts of his journey, the changed town of Silverton, and the progress of the case against the mining company officials. Each letter closed with declarations of love and plans for their future together. In late October, nearly 6 weeks after Russell's departure, Felicity received a telegram that made her heart stop momentarily. Case concluded. Stop. Heading home. Stop. Arrive. Tuesday noon. Train. Stop. All my love. Russell. Tuesday dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn day. Felicity arrived at the station an hour early, too anxious to wait at home any longer. As the train pulled in, billowing steam across the platform, she strained to see among the disembarking passengers. And then he was there, taller than she remembered, his face more tanned from outdoor travel, his smile brilliant as he caught sight of her. Felicity didn't care about propriety or the curious gazes of onlookers. She ran to him, and Russell caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that spoke of weeks of longing. "You're really here," she whispered against his shoulder. "You're safe. I told you I'd come back," he said, setting her down but keeping an arm around her waist. "Nothing could have kept me away." As they walked from the station, Russell told her the outcome of the trial. The mining officials had been convicted, his name fully cleared, and the new sheriff had even offered him his old deputy position back. "I hope you declined," Felicity said, suddenly worried. Russell's laugh was reassuring. "Of course I did. My life is here now. With you." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Which reminds me." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a delicate gold ring set with a modest diamond flanked by 2 small sapphires. "I know we're already engaged," Russell said, suddenly looking nervous. "But I wanted to do this properly." There on the main street of Willow Springs, with afternoon shoppers and businessmen as witnesses, Russell James dropped to one knee before Felicity. "Felicity James, these weeks away from you have only confirmed what I already knew, that you are the love of my life, the woman I want to build a future with. Will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Felicity's eyes filled with tears of happiness. "Yes, Russell. Today and always, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and kissed her, heedless of the small crowd that had gathered and was now offering congratulations and well wishes. They were married 3 weeks later in the same church where they had first danced together. The whole town turned out for the celebration, even Sheriff Thomas, who had become one of Russell's strongest supporters after the news from Colorado. After a brief honeymoon in San Antonio, they returned to Felicity's family ranch, which they renamed the Double J. Russell proved to be as skilled at ranching as he had been at law enforcement, and under their combined management, the property flourished. Felicity continued teaching at the Rockingham, though she reduced her schedule after the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Eleanor Rose, in 1880. A son, Thomas William, followed 2 years later, and another daughter, Margaret Grace, in 1884. By 1888, the Double J had grown to 3 times its original size, and Russell and Felicity had built a larger house to accommodate their growing family. Yet they kept the old porch rockers, where they still sat together each evening, watching the sun set over the land they both loved. On the 10th anniversary of their first meeting, Russell surprised Felicity with a special celebration. He cleared the furniture from their spacious living room, invited a few musicians from town, and recreated the church social where they had met. As they waltzed together in the soft lamplight, their children watching with delight, Russell whispered in Felicity's ear, "Have I told you today how grateful I am that I found the courage to cross that room and ask you to dance?" Felicity smiled up at the man who had changed her life with that simple gesture. "Only about a dozen times. But I never tire of hearing it." "I love you, Felicity James," Russell said, his blue eyes as tender as they had been on that first night. "And I love you, Russell James," she replied, resting her head against his chest as they danced, their hearts beating in perfect rhythm, just as they had from the moment a lonely woman and a brave cowboy had found each other across a crowded room in Willow Springs, Texas.